All right, great. Looks like we've got a couple more folks joining us here tonight. Thank you for choosing to spend this lovely Wednesday evening with Jackson County Conservation and Trees Forever. All right. I hope everyone out there can hear us all right. If you're having any issues, please drop a note in the chat function and I'll do everything I can to get a hold of you and help you resolve the issues. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little speech bubble with a chat function there. If you would please let us know how many folks are in your household watching this program tonight, what city you're joining us from, and how you've heard about this program. It will help us bring you more programming in the future. All right, great. Wonderful to see everyone here. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get going. This program is being recorded. My name is Jennifer Meyer with Jackson County Conservation, naturalist out of the Hurstville Interpretive Center. So last August, we were hit with a derecho, and for many folks here in Iowa, the derecho was bewildering and devastating on multiple levels. And what it took to assess what happened, really process what happened, and then rebuild afterward has been quite a process for a lot of people. Now, with Trees Forever, Debbie, you're in a unique position to give people really good sound advice on what to do with trees, as that really is the community aspect, and the caring for trees is a lot of what Trees Forever is for, correct?
That is correct.
All right, well, if you would, this is Debbie Flugel. She is joining us from Trees Forever. I know she's a field officer here, but if you could tell us a little bit more about what Trees Forever does and what your position entails too.
I sure will. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Debbie Flegel. I'm a program manager and field coordinator for Trees Forever. I'm located in central Illinois. So if you're familiar with Illinois, I'm about 20 minutes south of Peoria. I've been with Trees Forever for about 15 years, and I manage our water quality programs, pollinator programs, and our Illinois community forestry programs. I'm also one of the certified arborists on staff, and I'm the only staff member that has the tree risk assessment qualification. So I have been doing several webinars and presentations on storm recovery. I was actually went to Cedar Rapids about 2 weeks after the derecho, and I can't imagine what you all have been through because we didn't have any damage here on August 10th. It was just where I live, we had severe thunderstorm warnings. We had up to between 60 and 70 mile an hour winds. We did lose a few branches in town, but nothing like what you all have experienced. But I was in Cedar Rapids 2 weeks after the storm, helping assess some trees at various nonprofit organizations throughout the community. And I've never seen anything like it. I've been through communities after tornadoes, helping them to assess their trees after a natural disaster, and the amount of devastation and tree loss was just, it's heartbreaking. So
yeah, it truly is.
Hopefully this will give you some ideas what to think about, what you can replant in your yard or in your community moving forward.
Great, great. Well, I really look forward to your perspective here. And if you want to, go ahead and share your screen and I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see here.
What are you doing? Why is she not talking?
She's bringing up.
Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. I am going to turn off my video so you can see it without, here we go. Hopefully you can all still see that. So what replanting after the derecho. So briefly, I want to talk about Trees Forever, who we are, if you're not familiar with our organization. Our mission is to plant and care for trees in the environment by empowering people, building community, and promoting stewardship. We've been around for over 30 years. Our headquarters are in Marion, Iowa. We have a staff of 22 working between Iowa and Illinois. And since our inception in 1989, we've planted just about 3.5 million trees between the states. And we are a membership-based organization, and we have done some national projects and received recognition for those. Annually, we provide assistance to about 200 communities and landowners across both states. We work with about 7,000 volunteers and provide over $650,000 in grants, along with technical assistance, so with assistance from our staff to help communities. So briefly, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but why do we plant trees? Why do we plant trees? Energy savings, for habitat, for wildlife and pollinators, to help manage our stormwater, improved air quality, improved water quality, to beautify the places where we live, work, and recreate, and so many more. But 7 months ago today, we had the derecho. The definition of a derecho is a widespread, long-lived, straight-line windstorm that is associated with fast-moving groups of severe thunderstorms, potentially rivaling hurricane wind forces. Wind speeds in the Cedar Rapids area was 140 miles per hour for 40 minutes. This was the most costly thunderstorm in US history, causing more than $11 billion in damages across the 700-mile swath throughout the Midwest. And for 2020, it was the second costliest natural disaster, being only surpassed by Hurricane Laura, which cost $14.1 billion. This is the same house afterwards as the previous photo. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources, very preliminary early estimates, says that Iowa communities have lost 4,424,426 trees due to the derecho. This is only in the communities and urban areas. This does not include any of the rural areas. They're still doing calculating those totals, but this is a very early estimate. So nearly 4.5 million trees were lost from the communities across Iowa. What was the effect of the storm on the trees? Leaves and branches were stripped off. Trees were uprooted, twisted, and broken. Susceptible trees include those that had included bark, weak branching junctures, internal decay, cracks, older trees that had any amount of dead wood, or trees that leaned more than 45 degrees. Other factors that cause tree failure in these high wind storms include broad and unbalanced crowns, or a canopy with many small twigs and branches. Fast-growing trees such as maples are also more susceptible to wind damage. Some of the more wind-resistant species include white oaks, swamp white oaks, Kentucky coffee trees, ginkgos, catalpa, bald cypress, sweet gum, and serviceberry, among others. Now, we haven't seen it get really hot yet after Iowa has lost 4.5 million trees. in their communities. But one thing we've seen after tornadoes is that many residents see their utility bills go up at least $60, if not more. So the trees are providing those energy benefits to help save on your heating and cooling. When looking at your trees, if you're still in the cleanup process, safety is always the #1 priority. Look up. These are photos that I took when I was there. And the inset, you see there's just a hanger, a large branch caught in the tree. And that was actually over someone's house and driveway. You want to prune back any broken branches and any tree that has been lost more than 50% of its crown, so more than 50% of all of its leaves, or it has lost more than 1/3 of the circumference of its trunk, you need to have it removed. If you still have tree cleanup to do, or make sure you're contacting, you can go to the International Society of Arboriculture, and you can type in your zip code and find a certified arborist near you that would be that would be willing to come out and look at your tree. One thing I did see was a lot of trees that had severe damage that were still standing. So a lot of questions are, can my tree be saved, or do I need to remove it? And there are a lot of factors to consider. One is, what was the condition of the tree prior to the storm? How old is it? What species is it? So is it a damaged ash tree, or is it a damaged oak tree? If it's an oak tree, we're going to be more, we're going to want to save that one more so than an ash tree, because there's of emerald ash borer moving through. Is it suitable to the site where it is? Is it planted in the right location, or is it too close to your house? What is the potential for future energy injuries? And the timing of the disaster. So with the derecho, all of the leaves, all of the trees were leafed out, so that those leaves just acted as a sail, and when the winds caught it, stripped the trees. And then again, if more than 50% of the crown, or more than 50% of all the leaves have been lost, more than 30% of the trunk is damaged, more than 30% of the circumference, or if the tree leans more than 45 degrees, it needs to be removed. One thing we have seen in multiple natural disasters over the time is that many trees that only needed some corrective pruning were removed because they had some damage. So we want to try to save as many of our community trees as possible. But now that spring is here, or almost here, on its way, we're thinking about replanting. And what do we want to replant? It's a common question we hear all the time is, what can I plant in my yard? And my standard answer is, I don't know, because I don't know where you live. Here are some factors that you need to consider. What kind of soil do you have? Do you have, is your soil clay-like? Is it sandy? Do you have wet or dry areas in your yard? How much sun does the area get? If you've lost your trees, maybe you have full sun now. But you also want to take into consideration of the buildings on your property. That includes your house, your garage, any sheds or barns. How much space do you have? Do you have overhead utility lines or underground utility lines nearby that you need to be concerned about? What do you like? We can give you recommendations, but ultimately it's, what do you like? What do you want planted in your yard? And then also check with your local tree board to see if there's any city ordinance on prohibited trees. Many communities do have tree ordinances, so you want to check with them to see if there are any trees that they don't want planted in their community. And develop a plan for your property, for your landscape. Have a purpose of why you're planting trees, not just because you went to the big box store and they were marked off on sale. Think about why you're planting those trees. Are you planting them because you want to attract pollinators and birds? Are you planting them because you want to see the beautiful fall color or the spring blooming flowers? Or you're trying to provide those energy benefits. So you're wanting to plant a large shade tree. Some things to think about is that large shade trees should be planted a minimum of 30 feet, planted a minimum of 30 feet away from utility lines and 20 to 25 feet away from buildings. So you need to have space if you're going to plant large shade trees. Small trees can be as close as 10 feet away from your house or your buildings. You don't want the tree roots to interfere with your foundation. So you don't want to plant trees within a foot or two of your foundation. If there's a sidewalk in front of your house, you want to also make sure the trees are at least 5 feet away from the sidewalk. So things to consider when you're developing a plan for your property. We want to make sure we're planting the right tree in the right place. Clearly, when this tree was planted, it was a small seedling or sapling, and utility lines were not a concern at that time because that tree wasn't going to get that big, or it wasn't that big when it was planted. But over time, this is clearly the wrong tree for the wrong location. Not only is it interfering in the utility lines and has to have a very bad pruning job, it also can prohibit some of the safety of traffic. So make sure we're planting the right tree in the right place. To help you with some of your tree selection, on our Trees Forever website, which is treesforever.org, you go to /tree_selection. We have a series of resources available for you to download for free that can help you provide some information on what kind of tree you might want to plant. So some of the resources we have are a roadmap to plant and care for your trees. But other resources on there include trees for locations that have power lines. So if you're planting along the right-of-way under a power line, so these are trees that are going to be less than 25 feet tall, so they will not interfere with the power lines. We have trees for locations without power lines, trees and shrubs for pollinators, which are all native species of trees, to the Midwest. We have trees that provide dense shade, trees that provide sparse to moderate shade, and trees for windbreaks. So all of those are resources for you to look at when it comes to choosing what you want to replant in your yard. These are all native species of trees. These are the top 10 trees for pollinators. This is research done by Dr. Doug Tallamy, entomologist and ecologist from the University of Delaware, and he has published several books. Bringing Nature Home is the first one. And so Trees Forever has modeled our trees and shrubs for pollinators after his research. So all of this is the top 10 list of trees species that are beneficial for pollinators. And so the numbers in parentheses is how many different types of pollinators need those trees to complete their life cycle. So oaks is the quintessential pollinator and wildlife tree. So anytime you can plant an oak, if you have the space to plant an oak, it's going to provide a food source for 534 different types of pollinators. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different ones. The majority of them are native species. So first is river birch. It's a medium-sized tree. It gets about 40 feet at maturity. You can get a multiple stem tree or a single stem. It has exfoliating bark, which means that it looks like the bark is peeling off. It is the host plant for many insects, including the mourning cloak butterfly and a variety of moths, as well as many different types of birds, including purple finch, black-capped chickadee, and also many mammals feed upon its seeds. But this is a beautiful tree. If you have a smaller space, this could be a tree for you. Swamp white oak. It prefers full sun. It gets up to about 60 feet tall at maturity. It can live up to 350 years. So these are going to be there long after we're gone. It does well in wet areas. So if you have some wetter spots in your yard or along a stream, swamp white oak is a great tree. Acorns provide food for many different types of birds and mammals, and it is a host plant for fur-streaked butterflies and dusky-winged skippers. Now, the butterflies and skippers, you know, oak trees do not have showy flowers, but it's the caterpillars that need the leaves as their first food source. Black cherry, this is one of my favorite trees. The downside is this one is not strong in heavy winds. It has the peeling, looks like peeling bark. It is one of the few trees that actually flowers and blooms after it leaves out. It's fairly fast growing. It likes multiple different types of soil conditions. Caterpillars of the tiger swallowtail and red spotted purple eat the leaves. The young bark has the lenticels, which are these white lines. It's how the bark produces does gas exchange. And as the tree gets older, more mature, the bark gets platy, and in my mind, it looks like burnt potato chips. But another great tree. This is a good one. These get fairly large, up to 100 feet. So this would make a great shade tree, as well as providing you the spring flowers. Shagbark hickory, another great tree, has beautiful flowers in the spring. Very unique bark. It's exfoliating, looks like the bark is peeling. It can be difficult to transplant. So if you're trying to transplant it from one location, if you're trying to dig it up in the woods to plant in your yard, it can be very difficult because they do have a very deep taproot. Many insects feed on the leaves, the nuts. The bark provides shelter for pollinators. We don't think about it, but when it rains, where do butterflies and insects go? They hide underneath the bark of exfoliating trees, such as shagbark. This is also, shagbark hickory also provides some of the summer roosting for the endangered Indiana bats and nesting habitat for the brown creeper, which is a small nesting bird. They also, once they're mature, produce nuts, hickory nuts, and if you can get to them before the squirrels do, you're very lucky. These are very resistant to very harsh winters. There are two types of hickories that have this exfoliating peeling bark. The shagbark hickory, the other one is the kingnut hickory. So if you have very small spaces, the next few trees are the ones that are the best to plant in small spaces. Redbud is a great spring blooming tree. It's the first ones to flower in the spring, has these beautiful pink flowers. They are actually fairly long lived. They can live up to about 75 years. Their leaves are heart-shaped. So this would be a great tree to add some color to your yard in the spring. Another one, which isn't, I don't see planted very often, but would be a great small spring flowering tree, is a serviceberry, which it has multiple different names. There's actually 20 different types of serviceberries. They're all a member of the rose family. They get to anywhere from 10 to 25 feet tall, and they can be either multiple stemmed like this photo is, or they can be single stemmed. They produce these reddish purple fruits that are actually very good. Again, if you can get to them before the birds do, they make a great snack. But the berries provide food for many birds and mammals, and the nectar and pollen from the flowers attract many different bees. And the caterpillars of the red spotted purple and striped hairstreak butterflies eat the leaves for their first food source. So this is another beautiful spring flowering tree for small spaces. The other one is a crabapple, which I'm sure many of you may have had in your yard already. I'm also a member of the rose family. And like other apple trees, it is susceptible to many diseases and pests. These can live up to about 50 years. There's different ones. Some are pink, some are yellow. Many pollinators are attracted to the pollen and nectar from the flowers. The fruits of the crabapple can actually be used to make jellies and ciders and vinegar. And the very dense branching makes great nesting places for small songbirds. Now we're looking at some trees with fall color. This one I love is sassafras tree. They're more of a medium-sized tree. Typically they get between 30 to 60 feet tall, but they can get up to 100 feet tall. They're fairly fast growing. They are allelopathic, which means they release chemicals through their roots that prevents other plants from growing underneath them. Many small birds and mammals feed on the fruits, the purplish red fruits, which is the bottom right photo. And I love sassafras because it's a great tree. If you are familiar with sassafras, you can, there's some great features too when you're talking to people about them. If you scratch a green twig on a sassafras, it smells like lemon pledge. If you take a leaf and crunch it up in your hand, it smells like Fruit Loops. My grandparents used to dig up the roots and make sassafras tea. And sassafras has 3 different leaf shapes. It has the one that the pitchfork, it has a football, and then it has the mitten leaf shape. So this is a great tree. Again, fairly fast growing, beautiful orangish red fall color. Red oaks, another beautiful fall color with the deep red, deep burgundy color. The bark is very thick, and it almost looks like, as you're looking at the bark of a tree, it almost looks like someone skied down the top of it. It looks like ski tracks alternating between the dark and light furrows. So it looks like it's striped. These are relatively easy to transplant. It does not produce acorns every year. It's every other year. However, these are susceptible to oak wilt disease. So if you have oak wilt disease in your vicinity, these would not be recommended to plant. But these are very long-lived, upwards of 500 years. Ginkgo. This is the only non-native tree on my species list that I'm going to be talking about tonight. This tree is also known as a maidenhair tree. It's native to China. and its fossils date back over 270 million years ago. It is long-lived, you know, in ideal situation. In China, it's been found to live almost 2,500 years. So it is actually a fossil. Prefers full sun. There are male plants and female plants. And if you've ever been around a female ginkgo, you don't want to be around a female ginkgo plant because they produce some very smelly fruits, and you don't want to track that through your house. So you want to try to get the male plants as much as possible. But these are very well adapted to planting in communities. They have this beautiful gold color in the fall. One nice thing is that ginkgos tend to drop all of their leaves at once. So if in the fall, if you're wanting to get out and rake your leaves up, for a ginkgo, one day it will be looking beautiful like this, and the next day all of the leaves will be on the ground. It's not that you have to keep continually raking up your leaves. Generally, there are no disease problems with ginkgos, and they are rarely attacked by insects. White oak is another tree with some great fall color. It's very slow growing, as we know oaks generally are. They can live up to 600 years. White oaks do not do well in wet areas, so you want to make sure you have a dry area. They do not tolerate flooding at all. These are again, oak trees are the quintessential wildlife tree. In the fall, they turn a purplish, reddish color to brown. And then shade trees. So these are going to be large trees, more than 75 feet tall at maturity, that are going to provide you the maximum energy benefits on your property, if you have the space for a large tree. So tulip tree is very distinct. It has a tulip flower-shaped leaves, and it has these beautiful spring flowers that are a combination of yellow, orange, and green. They grow fairly rapidly, producing flowers in less than 10 years. Many small mammals and birds eat the seeds of tulip tree, and the flowers attract numerous different types of bees and other pollinators, as well as hummingbirds. Tulip tree is the largest hardwood in North America. They can get up to 120 feet tall. So these are very long, very tall, long-lived trees. Hackberry, there's a love-hate relationship with hackberries. These are very commonly planted throughout communities because they're very hardy. They have a very distinctive bark that looks like has warts on it, and they're oftentimes covered in lichens, which gives them their bark the greenish tint. The leaves tend to be crescent moon shaped, and oftentimes they have the little galls or the little bubbles on the bottom of the leaves, and those are insect galls that do not hurt the tree. These are they grow very rapidly, and they can live several hundred years. The birds or the fruits of the hackberry provide overwintering food for birds. And many different types of butterflies require hackberry as their host plant, such as the hackberry emperor, tawny emperor, morning cloak, and question mark butterfly. Kentucky coffee tree, a great shade tree, very underutilized. I like this tree because it's like the ugly duckling of trees. When it's very small, it just looks like a stick. It doesn't have leaves on it most of the year, from mid-autumn to mid-spring. It doesn't have leaves on it. It does have seeds in the bottom left photo there, you see the seed pods. The seeds and the leaves are toxic to mammals, so they're not going to eat them. It does tolerate urban conditions very well. It doesn't seem to have any disease problems or pest problems. There are other cultivars that do not produce the seeds, so if you're looking for that, but they're a great shade tree. They're going to provide a little bit of moderate shade, so they're not fully leafed out. As you can see, the leaves resemble locust leaves, so it's going to provide you that moderate shade. They grow fairly quickly. They get up to 75 to 80 feet tall. And a bald cypress. We're seeing these planted further and further north. Bald cypress are actually a conifer, so an evergreen. However, they lose their needles in the fall. Their needles fall off, so they are actually a deciduous conifer. They get up to 120 feet tall at maturity. Very long-lived. On average, about 200 years, but some can live between 1,000 and 1,500 years. They have very few pests. They have very a shaped pyramid. They have a beautiful bronze rust color in the fall. The needles turn before they fall off. This is also a very winter hardy plant. They have spherical cones, and the leaves are have a very feathery appearance and soft texture. They provide great nesting habitat for many birds, including woodpeckers, bald eagles, owls, herons, and egrets. If they're planted near water, after about 75 years, they do produce the knees that you think of when you think of a bald cypress. But those knees help stabilize them in and around water. So a great, beautiful tree. Again, you need to have a lot of space to plant a bald cypress. But if you have the space, a great shade tree. So those are some of the trees that I would recommend. But now we're going to talk about how do you plant and care for those trees. So when you purchase your new tree and you have contacted, in Iowa, I think it's different, it's One Dig. Here in Illinois, we call it Julie. To locate your utilities and everything, you're digging your hole. Your hole should be 2 to 3 times the width of the root ball of your tree. You want to make sure that the root flare or root collar, which is where the stem flares out towards the roots, is just at or above ground level. So you don't want to dig a huge hole very deep. If you're planting like this photo is showing a bald and burlapped tree, which is a larger tree, it's usually wrapped in the roots are wrapped in a burlap and sometimes a metal case or metal cage. You're going to want to remove as much of the burlap as possible and remove the wire as possible because the roots do not grow through it. You want to make sure it's straight, and then you're going to backfill the hole. What can happen if you plant your tree too deep? If you don't get that root flare above the soil, over time, the roots will girdle. They will start to circle around the tree, and it can ultimately cause a tree failure. So it shortens the lifespan of your tree if you planted them too deep. We also want to make sure you mulch your new tree. The mulch is going to help the tree retain moisture. It's going to help prevent weeds and competing weeds. It's going to help moderate the soil temperature. It adds organic matter to the soil, and it keeps lawnmowers and weed whackers away from the trunk of your tree. Now, I know we've all seen mulch volcanoes. We do not want you to use a mulch volcano on your tree because it causes many, many problems. When you mulch your tree, you should mulch wide and about 2 to 4 inches deep, thinking of the mulch ring like a bagel, where the tree is coming up through the center of the bagel and the mulch is the bagel. So you do not want the mulch to touch the tree trunk in any way, shape, or form. If you do the mulch volcano, this is what can happen. It can kill your tree because it can rot the tree bark. It can increase the potential of girdling roots. So just say no to mulch volcanoes. We won't tell you where this was taken. We also want you to protect the bark. Depending on where you live, if there's a lot of deer pressure in your community or at where you live, you may want to fence your new trees for a while until they get tall enough that the deer or rabbits, well, so they get tall enough that the deer won't eat them, but also to prevent rabbits. Do not tie anything onto your tree. If you do need to stake your tree, make sure you remove those stakes within 1 to 2 years after planting. And also, again, prevent lawnmower damage and weed whacker damage from the trunk of your tree. Watering your newly planted trees, you want to give your newly planted tree an equivalent of 1 inch of rain per week. So general guidelines are for every inch caliper the trunk is. So for every inch around the trunk is that you're planting, you give it 2 to 3 gallons of water. So a small tree, generally I would give it 5 gallons of water every 3 to 4 days, depending on the weather. The larger your tree, the more water you're going to give it. So if you're planting a 2-inch tree, you're going to give it about 10 gallons of water every time you water it. So every 3 to 4 days, depending on what the weather does. And you're going to continue that for the first 2 to 3 years to give it a good chance to get established. And during very hot periods of the year, during drought conditions, which we're seeing more and more frequently, you want to even water your large established trees, because they are suffering over the last many years. We've seen a lot of large trees die due to extended periods of drought. So if you want to keep your trees in your yard, you need to water them all. And we water from April until the ground freezes in November. The types of watering methods, you can get a gator bag that you can fill up once a week or so and let the water slowly percolate into the ground. You can turn on a garden hose on a slow drip for a couple hours, or you can just go out and water your tree with a 5-gallon bucket, or drill a hole in the bottom of the bucket and move it around the entire root zone. You don't want to just water up next to the trunk of the tree. You want to water all of those roots that are extending out as well. If you're not going to mulch, you need to at least weed around the tree. Weeds invite people to litter. It can be an eyesore. The weeds are competing against the tree for nutrients and water. So ideally, we would like you to mulch around your tree. It's the best thing you can do for your tree. And you may have heard Trees Forever is doing some tree adoptions throughout Cedar Rapids and Marion, but we are going to be doing some throughout other areas as well. So thinking about what you want to plant adds to, and think about a diversity. Whatever you're going to plant a diversity. You will notice I did not put any maples in this presentation, and I'm going to tell you why. Because in the Midwest, many of our communities are maple heavy. They're dominated by maples. There are already existing invasive pests out there that prefer maples as their first food choice. So we want you to plant a diverse mix of species in your yard. You live in a neighborhood, think outside of the box, plant something that your neighbors don't have. And if at all possible, reach out to to Trees Forever. We can provide you some assistance. And that is the end of my presentation. So with that, I will take any questions. And turn my video back on.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. All right. I love how you emphasize diversity there. I'll definitely back up the maple heavy viewing. The pollen is just starting to glitter on the horizon here. And
not
yes,
looking forward to that. I have terrible allergies.
Yeah, but that's okay.
About the month of April, I
All right.
can't breathe very well. So.
Yeah, I love your list of trees, the variety of shapes, sizes, color. The one that stuck out to me though was sassafras. I wish they would grow in our zone. We're just on the edge north for growing those, but if anybody has luck in Eastern Iowa, let me know. I want to know about this sassafras.
Another one that has beautiful fall color that I think is right on the border, and with our seeing more extremes in the weather, the hotter summers, colder winters, extreme weather patterns where we're getting wetter springs, you go ahead, if you have time, if you have the space, try it. You never know. We're some of the far northern communities are planting southern species, like native to Mississippi and Louisiana. So the planting zones are shifting a little bit. So just because you're not there yet doesn't mean it won't be. So, you can always try and experiment. Another one that I didn't mention, but I love, and it's right on the border, would be like a black tupelo or a black gum. And again, it's more of a southern species, but we plant it up here. They're planting it further north, upwards in Chicago. So, try, experiment. I feel like.
There we go. All right. That's great advice. Thank you. All right. So at one point you mentioned reaching out to having an arborist come out and do an assessment on your property. Can you tell us the name of that group again with the website that we can just type in our zip code?
Sure. It's the International Society of Arboriculture. It is ISA.org, I believe is what it is.
Great, thank you. All right, was there any particular species of tree you would recommend as being deer resistant or easy to care for with a lot of deer pressure?
I wish I had an easy answer for that one, but I can't say that there are any that are really deer resistant. The ginkgo might be. If you have concerns about deer in your yard, I would fence your trees if at all possible for a couple of years until they get tall enough that the deer can't eat off that terminal bud at the very top. I know I planted a pecan last fall, and the deer just chowed down on it. I planted it where I planted it. You wouldn't think they would have been able to find it, but they did. They ate the buds off of it, and I got to prune it off to see if I can save it. But otherwise, I'm going to have a shrub. But with deer, it's hard. There's so many different methods that different people use to protect their trees from deer. I've heard hanging a bar of Irish Spring soap on your tree. Some people swear by it, others it hasn't worked at all. I try to use the err on the side of caution and just fence it with like 4 or 5 foot tall chicken wire and a couple rebar posts to hold it in.
Mm-hmm.
Others have used just rebar posts and put multiple rebar posts around the trunk of their tree to, one, prevent them from rubbing on it, because if a deer rubs on your tree, he's going to come back to the same tree year after year and rub on it. So to prevent that, they put rebar posts around the trunk of the tree, and the deer don't like the noise that it makes when their antlers hit it. But as far as being, deer like everything. It's hard to find something that a deer is not going to eat.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any recommendation on tree wraps or tubing? For the conservation department, we use a combination of things, but typically they are the like helical wraparound tree wraps, and they really only stay on the tree for the first couple of years. After that, we really do rely on the big 4x4 welded fencing with 3 posts, that wraparound style.
Yep. It's any of those work.
Okay.
For the small trees, the helical white, almost, they're heavier than paper, but they work very well. I've seen the perforated drainage tile. If you can use a lighter color, such as white, that will help, because the dark color absorbs heat, and that can cause problems. But if you're going to wrap your trees, make sure you remove them after no more than 2 years, because that can cause problems. Numerous places I've seen that people have staked their trees or wrapped them and then forgot to come back and take them off. And so that can cause problems in the long run if you leave that on there. But, whatever you're comfortable with works. I've seen people use even the orange snow fencing.
Sure. All right. Another question we had here is, the question was, we lost 3 trees and had the stumps ground out. How far away from the original trees should we plant a replacement, or can it go in the same spot?
It's not recommended to plant them in the exact same spot. You need to move them off probably at least a foot from where they are. You could up to 2 feet. The challenge with planting them there, though, is you're having those old roots still there. So you're going to need an auger to dig through those roots. Gotcha. But it's not ideal to plant them in the exact same location where the old tree was.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. All right. While we were talking about digging and planting the trees, I did look up our number for who do you call before you dig, and that's 811 here in Iowa. Go ahead and give those folks a call if you are going to be digging more than 4 inches deep. Err on the side of caution. Give those folks a couple of days to go ahead and give you a heads up, especially if things have changed in your neighborhood or you're new to the neighborhood. Go ahead and get that checked out. You really do want to err on the side of caution there.
And one thing to help is if you can mark in your yard where you want to plant a tree before you call, and that way they can it gives them an idea. And then after they have marked, you can come back and say, oh, well, I'm too close to the communications line, or I'm too close to utility lines, whatever, but you can move it. So ideally, you want your trees to be a minimum of 12 to 18 inches away from any of the utility lines.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right. As far as questions go, I think we've got them wrapped up. If anybody wants to go ahead and chime in, like we said at the beginning, this program is being recorded and we'll be posting it through the Jackson County Conservation media outlets. So you look for Facebook or join us on our website, jacksoncountyconservation.com. So jacksonccb.com. Again, I'm Jen Meyer, naturalist with Jackson County Conservation. Thank you, Debbie, with Trees Forever. Before we sign out tonight, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Get out and enjoy the spring.
Oh,
You know, spring's almost here. Thank goodness. It's been a long winter.
absolutely.
It's been a long year. It's been a very long year. So I'm personally am looking forward to getting out and, you know, seeing some people and get some trees planted this year.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. So
One thing I do want to mention is if you're looking for a specific tree, make sure you contact your local nursery or maybe multiple nurseries. One thing we're starting to see is that there is going to be a shortage of trees because we need about as a country, we need about 3 billion trees produced to replace just the ones we've lost. And with COVID and everything, this spring, a lot of nurseries used up their supply last year because they didn't know what was going to happen with COVID this year. So if you're planning to purchase trees, contact the nursery early and have specifics on what you're looking for to see if they can help you find it.
all right. Yep. Feel free to give us a question, call with questions. Conservation phone number is 563-652-3783. With that, thank you again, Debbie. Thank you so much for spending your time on the Wednesday evening with us. Take care, folks. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.